There it is.
Right now, Matt. Right now.
It's on.
Okay.
It's on.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast. Today we have our friend Art Black is back. And
Back in black.
Heather's here, of course. Heather's never not here, which is awesome. And Matt, Mr. Matt, is here for the first time on the podcast. Hello, Matt. So,
this is Matt. My name is Benito Shapiro.
So today our topic is going to be victimology in politics, or something like that, right? I wanted to talk about AOC. I wanted to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene and all the fun stuff going on there. I wanted to talk about how victimization impacts leadership in the United States, and just kind of talk about whatever. We'll just let things kind of flow. So recently, for everybody who doesn't know, on January 6th, there was an insurrection, right, at the Capitol building. And recently, AOC came out with a bunch of videos, or I guess they were several videos over a period of time, talking about her experience. And, they were very emotional at times. She said she was traumatized, etc., and so on. And so there was after this happened, there was a big controversy because people were saying that she had lied about being in the actual Capitol building, and she wasn't actually in the Capitol building, she was somewhere else. That wasn't actually true. She didn't lie about it. If you watch the videos, she was honest about where she was. There were actually some media outlets that picked it up and misrepresented it, and that's on them, not her. But I think the question for me, if we want to sort of start from this perspective, is, do we think that her response to this situation is, an example of sort of political opportunism? Is she using this as an emotional crutch to kind of prop herself up and give herself attention? Or is this like a legitimate trauma experience? My personal perspective is, I think it's a little of both. I think she is, I think anybody in that sort of, or most people in that sort of experience would be pretty scared, right? You don't know what's going to happen. These people are taking over the Capitol building, for Christ's sake, right? They've overwhelmed the 3 Capitol police that were there, and broke into the building, and she's afraid for her life. So I mean, to that extent, I feel like a lot of it's sort of legitimate, but I also feel like some of it is a little bit kind of a fabrication, drama induced stuff. So we can start there with her reaction, and then kind of make comparisons to other politicians after that. And also, I kind of want to touch on leadership skills and various other things, and whether or not that type of mentality shows strong leadership. Who wants to go first?
Oh, well, that's basically the point, right? I mean, you'd be stupid not to use this.
For an opportunistic.
Yeah,
Right.
Politics is about accumulating power and advancing your agenda. When the opposition has fucked up to this level, you're just a shitty politician if you don't capitalize on it.
It's an interesting take.
As if it's a strength for a politician to be able to drum up support over incidents that happen by drumming up emotional support. But you don't think that she is just being genuine. You think that she's just like all of the other politicians who do actually use that as a tool.
I actually think she's being very legitimate in her response. Whenever you look at how the right talks about her, things like that, a lot of the shit that was on Parler about like literally killing her. Yeah, I'm sure she had a very genuine emotional response to it, but I also don't think that AOC is stupid. I mean, she's very, very good at capturing public attention. So I do think in some ways this is calculated, but it's calculated from a perspective that this is also how she feels. I think in a lot of regards, AOC and sadly, MTJ, Marjorie are both very genuine people.
Are you
So is Trump though too.
What?
No, but I mean, he is in the moment. He's genuine. He comes across as authentic because he responds to what's going on in the moment, right? I just don't necessarily think genuine is honest either.
I do not think Trump is always genuine, except the general vibe that you get from Trump that he is not. Like there's an obvious kind of bullshit aspect to Trump's personality that he plays up really, really well. He's a sort of a P.T. Barnum-like character. But
he's kind of full of hot air to me, full of shit most of the time.
Yeah,
he doesn't actually know what's going on.
But
well,
there's who
being
thinks
like
AOC does? I mean, all right, go ahead, Art.
I was going to say, like, there are times where Trump can be very genuine when he's speaking from a place of like insane narcissism, and you can tell that there's a genuine something there. Yeah, I mean, in most cases, it's just like you were saying, like P.T. Barnum, like just bullshit and spin. But every now and then he does have that edge of like, oh gosh, he really believes this nonsense. Like, and I guess to a certain extent that's its own category. Like with AOC in the Capitol, this is like being in a casino and winning, like a jackpot. It's like, oh God, like your enemies fucked up that badly that, they incited this riot and then you were there and these events happened and you can relate them. I mean, you won the jackpot as far as like, emotional theater, like take the money. So all she's doing, I mean, you don't even have to lie about it at that point. I mean, you just tell people, you can throw your, throw your emotions out there and, you don't really need that much embellishment. We have somebody that's getting death threats all the time. They're under siege. They knew that this was coming. They had a ton of ramp up to it. There's a ton of tension. Nobody knew how that day was going to end. And as shit was going down, you're like, wow, this could be it. Like in retrospect, hindsight's 2020. We know how it played out. But like if you're there in the moment and you've got like, like you're hearing reports that like the Capitol Police were breached and like there's people inside the wire and shit's going down. I mean, you'd have to be in her shoes. You'd have to be kind of a moron to not be afraid. So, for her to play it up afterwards, yeah, I mean, you can say maybe she should be more stoic and keep it to herself, but she doesn't have to. She's a politician.
Let me ask you a question. How do you think the public would have responded to a male politician coming out that way? The same way she did.
Well, she's a millennial. I mean, you think about like the social media aspect of sharing and all that. And other generations probably wouldn't take it as well, or they'd take it differently. But that kind of social media outpouring is probably something that's more accepted under a certain generation than it is in older generations. So I think that might be more of a generational thing than a male-female thing.
Maybe. I definitely think that being a woman in that situation, which is why she brought up the incident that she had with being, I don't know if it was rape or whatever. I can't remember the word she used, but I think that's why it was a double traumatization for her, because as a woman, that's what it felt like. It felt like she was going to be physically attacked again. And obviously with all of the comments made towards her and about her online and through different media platforms, that's a very scary situation to be in. So I'm not sure if the fact that she's a woman sort of discounts that or if it supports that.
Probably has pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on party. Like Republicans would react a lot more negatively to a Republican male coming out and saying that he was terrified and all of that, just because Republicans tend to favor these strong men.
Masculine, yeah. That's a very good point.
I think that Democrats would probably have some of that, but certainly not to the same degree.
Yeah, it's complicated, but I think that there's probably some ways being a female worked for and worked against her in coming out, in sharing in this way.
It also, because Republicans are a lot more sympathetic to the people who were at the riot, there's that to consider.
Yeah, I wonder what it would have been if the tables had been flipped. I mean, obviously, you're not going to get the left in that type of situation doing something like that. I mean,
not yet.
Hashtag
the revolution is coming.
Then in another 4 years or something, give us 4 years of this fucker, and we might have actually done something like that. Because
but let's go with your thing. Let's say it was Antifa that had stormed the Capitol. Like, how stoic do you think that the conservatives would be right now? Like, probably
absolutely
they probably
not. Oh God, the fucking hammer would be down every day.
But they wouldn't be talking about it in terms of trauma. They'd be talking about it in terms of anger.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Well, if you think about like post 9/11, all they want. I mean, we're gonna be talking about 9/11 for the next 300 years because all the conservatives ever wanted is something to feel victimized about, so they can go bomb people. Like they don't have to talk about it in terms of personal trauma. They don't need that. They need the collective. We were wronged as a people, so sign here for the bombing. And with Antifa, it would have been the same thing. Whereas with Democrats, you're just dealing with a different demographic, the people that want something else, and that kind of emotional connection outpouring, even if you want to say it's insincere or it was played up or however you want to spin it, but there's something to it that speaks to, her fan base.
Can I just sort of address the leadership aspect of this? Because I find that problematic, at least to me. So it's very so if you think about like famous leaders of the past, right, like Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, right, it's really hard for me to imagine them getting on stage and talking about various their trauma in this really sort of like victimized way, right? They always spoke about things more about the world and people and empowerment and all of that kind of stuff. And I just feel like she's this really sort of, I mean, in her own way, right? She's this really powerful figure, leadership figure in the Progressive Party, and she's just like constantly kind of like going through all of this victimization, and you just see it as just being like emblematic of a weakness in our culture. I don't want to come across, I just feel like leaders should be on a different level, right? We should have higher expectations for how they experience certain things. And I don't feel like she's coming from a position of strength when she's sort of like
having emotions,
acting like
being
this.
A female.
What's that?
You mean having emotions and being a female? I mean, we've done it the male way for so long. I think maybe you're just kind of shocked that we're doing it a different way. I mean, this is what we do.
Well, let me give you a good example.
I don't have to be like a man to be a leader. I can be a woman and still be a leader. And I can have those feminine, emotional, sensitive traits and still be a leader. We just don't view it in our culture as a leadership. But it is.
I'm just going to give you a quick example because you brought up JFK in one point. So I don't know if you're familiar with the story of PT 109, but in World War II, JFK was in the Navy, and they basically survived an incident at sea, and it was kind of spun into this tale of heroism. And what had really happened is that you had a bunch of young guys who didn't really know what they were doing, and they kind of fell asleep and they kind of got run over by a Japanese destroyer in the middle of the night. So they wound up, most of them surviving and all that. And there's a, story about it, but it was not really a tale of heroism. It was something horrible that happened to some guys who kind of got thrust into a situation. And it was much like the Capitol, thing. It did something that just happened and they survived. And they didn't really do that well. Like they basically, for their own benefit, they kind of told a version of the story that painted themselves all in a very good light. But, you know, and years later, it kind of came out that, you know, this is just kind of a fuck up. We just kind of survived. And, you know, sometimes that's a very human story. And it would have been very hard to kind of accept that just, you know, you wind up in a war where things just happen and you're just, a lot of times just lucky to survive. You know, you didn't spend your whole lifetime training. These guys were just kind of
So
thrust into it.
I think that's a good example. Let me ask you a question as a veteran yourself, right? So like if you're on the battlefield with somebody, right? And I know that everything isn't a battlefield, but I mean, I feel like AOC, right? Or somebody that deals with trauma in that way is like the guy who sees something traumatic happen. You ever seen The Thin Red Line where the guy's holding his head and just screaming? Have you guys seen that movie? I feel like that's AOC. She gets into a situation, she doesn't know what to do, right? And I feel like, you know, she's just not demonstrating leadership skills. She's not demonstrating strength. She's internalizing it. She's thinking about her own personal experiences, and she's not saying, okay, well, this happened. Let's move forward as a country, and let me utilize this in a way where I can show people that, you know, I can get through this kind of stuff, you know, without having it sort of handicap me. And that's the feeling I'm getting from her response. I don't know if it's wrong or right, but as a leadership quality, I'm questioning it.
Well, you think about leadership as far as, you know, speaking to the country where they're at. And, you know, it takes a lot of courage to, you know, admit that you were scared or to kind of, you know, give a raw account of what happened. For instance, the first time that I was shot at, I froze, like I actually couldn't move. And it took me a few seconds to like reboot. And, you know, I actually almost, I was on the top of a 3-story building and I almost lost my footing and fell off a 3-story building, even though I didn't need to. Like I could have caught myself, but I just couldn't get myself to mentally reboot because it was like processing in my head. I'm like, oh, that wave of pressure that went by my head and that noise, I know what that is. And I couldn't get myself to restart. And eventually I did, but, you know, and then, you know, later on, it wouldn't take me nearly that long, you know, but, you know, when you were freshly exposed to that sort of thing, as most Americans are, I mean, this is just not a normal, that level of trauma. Most people are never going to have a mob of thousands of people outside that's going to be full of people that probably you don't want to get cornered by. And they're, you know, breaking through security and you don't know what's happening. It's just it's a historical event that I don't think loses anything. And it was probably risky for her to speak about in the way that she did. So, you know, American society today isn't the one of the 40s and 50s that, you know, after World War, you know, II, you had to pretend to be a certain way, or after Vietnam, you had to pretend to be a certain way, or, you know, whatever. You're speaking to different generations, and, you know, there's different understanding of the expectations of post-trauma that, I don't know. I just think that we're not that kind of people that feels the need to put up that PT 109 front of, you know, hey, we were, you know, tough and soldiered on, and, you know, it's just everything has to be this, you know, tale of bravery. A lot of times it's not.
I agree with you. I don't think that's necessary either. But I do think that as a leader, that there is and should be a certain expectation of not making everything about yourself and not sort of fixating on your own trauma all the time.
A lot of those people literally wanted to kill her. Like, at what point are you do not make this about yourself? I actually think what she's doing is brilliant. She's helping to set the narrative that these people are dangerous, unhinged, a complete threat to the very fabric.
Is that a narrative that needs to be set?
Yes. You need to repeatedly stress this as much as possible. That's just good branding at that point.
Okay. I mean, I don't necessarily think that it takes AOC to sort of constantly talk about her traumatic experiences via her apartment on her cell phone.
Trying to set this narrative that, like, if you turn on Tucker Carlson, these are ordinary, average, everyday Americans. What went wrong? Just trying to kind of sweep all of this under the rug. When this came out, there was the right trying to do everything from paint these as Antifa impersonating Trump supporters. You need to
Is that any different than what the left does with Antifa when they try to portray them as white supremacists and they
Wait,
try to minimize what they are doing too?
you tried when the left, I don't think you meant to say Antifa there.
I mean to say Antifa. So in other words, when
The left does not try to portray Antifa as white supremacists.
I've gotten in
No, saying that
several
there's
discussions with people who say that white supremacists infiltrate protests as Antifa to try to
Okay.
So yeah, so they're not really Antifa, they're like
the
infiltrators.
Okay,
But I'm just saying this is an argument that people make, and it's the same argument that the right made when they stormed the building. Well, it wasn't actually us; it was Antifa, right?
But
It's the same exact argument. No, no.
But it's actually true. There's a truth to both of that. So everyone that was there for the rally for January 6th for Trump, a lot of them. So we're on Facebook all the time. I knew some shit was going to go down. You guys probably knew some shit was going to go down. We're all, trolling Parler and all of their stupid Facebook groups and Twitter feeds and everything. And so we see all this shit, right? But a lot of the Trump supporters tend to live in these sort of bubbles. And they absolutely had no idea that there were other people planning on storming the Capitol, bringing their guns, making freaking pipe bombs, or being violent in any way to some politicians. They just kind of closed their ears and their eyes. I have no idea what's going on. And they were there at the rally and then they left, or they marched over to the Capitol and they're thinking, oh, we're just here for support for Trump or whatever while they do this vote. And Mike Pence is, certifying all of the election stuff. So they're not there to storm the Capitol. Some of the people, when this began, were like, that's my line, I'm not going in. Some of the people went all the way up to the Capitol but had no intention of going in. Some of the people found themselves going in but had no intention of hurting someone. Some of them get swept up in it. There's a very wide array of what happens in these events. Yeah. But it's the same thing when you had Black Lives Matter protests going on and you had Antifa showing up, and then you had like anarchists showing up and Black Bloc showing up and cops who were off duty showing up pulling bullshit. I mean, it's the same exact thing. There are elements within each group that shouldn't have been there, elements that had no intention of doing anything wrong. So, I mean, there's a truth to.
That's what I mean. But that's all I'm saying.
To what Nick specifically said, though. So typically, what is pointed out is there were like one or two instances where people who had links to white supremacy groups during the protests used it as an excuse to go do boogaloo shit. I don't think that most people on the left believe that Antifa themselves are against running around setting shit on fire.
I would disagree with that. I think a lot of people don't believe that it's happening to the extent that it's happening, or they think that it's sort of some other kind of infiltration operation by groups of outside agitators that want to make the BLM protests look bad. I'm just saying. I think that there's a lot of people out there who would agree with that. I mean, I've talked to them. They're certainly online. They're certainly on Facebook.
That did, though.
What's that?
There were certainly a handful that did.
A handful, but you're talking about billions of dollars in damage, right?
I agree. I don't think most of that was random white supremacists. Right. Most of that was Antifa. That's kind of the shit it does.
What county was it where the precinct was burned down? I don't remember either.
What do you mean?
I was just gonna say about that it was obviously targeted, that they wanted to burn down and destroy the actual police building. So
the police station that was burned down by people in the protest. I don't know if they were Antifa, but there were people involved in the protest. There was a guy from a white supremacist or some sort of affiliated organization that had shot a gun inside the police station, but he was not charged with or responsible for burning it down. Those were 4 separate people. And there was a little bit of confusion around that. There was also some guy who was like walking around breaking windows at another protest. But again, these are isolated incidents and they're probably responsible for very little of what happened. All I'm saying is that it's almost a reflex for us to protect the fringes on our own side, and it's what people do. And I don't necessarily, and look, if you're going to give in a comparative way, right, if you compare the right to the left, any day of the week, I'm going to tell you that the right wing has lost its fucking mind and is significantly worse than the left. I believe that wholeheartedly. I don't even think it's close. But the reason that I'm so on top of that, and the reason that I try to sort of drive these points home, is because I think it's really important we don't become them. And I think that watching the Sanders stuff happen in 2016, seeing some of the violence sort of surface over the past 4 years, seeing how people have sort of started justifying violence. They did a poll the other day, or a poll came out the other day, and they polled right-wing people and left-wing people. And I think 30% on each side said that violence is sometimes justified. And they compared it to a poll prior to Trump, and the poll prior to Trump was in single digits on both sides. So it went up significantly over time. And I'm just saying that, it's good to kind of keep these things in mind. That's my only point anyway. Okay.
I would like to piggyback just one thing on that. So back in 2016, when all of that was going on, and there were definitely some conspiracies that sprang out of the whole 2016 primary election season, I mean, thousands and thousands of Sanders supporters showed up to the DNC that year and were gated off outside as the certification was going on inside, right? At no point were there physical threats being made. At no point, I think some stupid gate was shaken and it was kind of faltering or something, but nobody stormed the building. Nobody threatened to hurt anybody while they were there. It was a completely different level of upsetness and what are we going to do about it than it was with what happened with Donald Trump and the insurrection on January 6th. And Bernie Sanders never even fucking acknowledged the stupid lawsuit that was brought up by Elizabeth and Jared Beck. He never even fucking acknowledged them. Trump is like, I'm going to hire lawyer after lawyer after lawyer after lawyer and try this angle and this angle and this
100%.
angle. So
it's not even.
Yeah, so I just wanted to widen that gap on what we're comparing here. The conspiracy nonsense on the right is by far way fucking crazier than whatever accusations we might have made.
Well, I mean, I think one of the big things is that
what's that?
Bernie Sanders himself is a lot more dignified and less insane than a lot of his hardcore supporters are. But Donald Trump, on some
level, he doesn't
level,
feed into them.
Is not as insane or is not as more dignified and all of that than a lot of his hardcore supporters are. I think if Sanders had the inclination to, he could have done a lot more damage to the Democrats during 2016 or 2020. It should have been obvious from the very beginning that Trump was willing to take everything with him. If he lost, I mean, that's A, he's a very vindictive person. B, Donald Trump didn't accept the results of an election he won. He's certainly not going to respond well to an election he loses.
All those illegal immigrants voting.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So you would agree, Matt, that the fervor on the left and right in the beginning of or during the 2016 election was really intense on both sides. It's just a leader on one of the sides wasn't willing to go to the same, degree as a leader on the other side. But if Sanders said, if he chose to be like Trump, he could have, the capacity for those people to act crazy was there, right? He just wasn't willing to bring it to that level. And if Trump had shown some self-restraint, there's a good chance that the right wouldn't have gone insane either.
So if Trump hadn't said anything, there would have been no riot at the Capitol.
That's right. I agree.
Yeah. Bernie never stoked the fires, though. He never put, kindle on that flame.
No, he just kept
people to believe those things. They just did. And lo and behold, that stupid 15% of Sanders supporters ended up being Trump supporters. So fuck them anyways.
So let's talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, everybody's favorite politician.
Yeah, she's like the AOC rival. It's perfect.
Well, there are some similar. Art, I think you actually said this. It was either Art or Matt. I can't remember, but there are some similarities. Oh, Matt did. Matt said. that the Democrats are using her the same way that the Republicans were using AOC. And I think that's true, and I think they should absolutely do that. You know, I mean, she's certainly representative of, so is Trump, a victimology on the right? That's really dangerous and, you know, insane.
I don't think she like represents a victimology on the right. I think she just represents how, for the past 50-ish years, the right has consistently portrayed everything as a conspiracy.
But that's a part of the victimization.
Well, except for white genocide, which is real.
True.
In Africa.
So I read a bunch of articles before we did this, and there was the highest percentage of people in the United States that identify as being victims are white men, weirdly. And a lot, and especially,
you know about the victimization of white men,
right? Who are likely, I mean, from any metric, probably the most privileged people, right? For the most part. I mean, obviously there's variations, and I have my own beliefs on that stuff, but they're pretty. I mean, white men are not oppressed in any meaningful way. So in any event.
Are you ignoring the war on Christmas?
I forgot about that. That's true. So in any event, I don't know if you guys want to just kind of talk about her. I think that the Democrats, I don't know how I feel about the committee stuff. I really feel like I think they made the right choice. I think the Republicans should have done it. Kevin McCarthy is probably the worst leader in the House of Representatives I've ever seen. I mean, the guy is just terrible, right? He's a total sycophant. And so anyway, I could go on forever. What do you guys think? Marjorie Taylor Greene, go.
I would agree that this was the right way to handle it. Strip her of her party or of her committee chair, or not even chair positions, it was just committee assignments. But leave her in office. If the Republicans were smart, they would be the ones leading the charge to get rid of her, because you kind of have these two factions within the Republican Party. You call it like the Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, the old school guys who, they're looking at the numbers. They're trying to get low taxes. They're trying to get deregulation. They have a certain ideological worldview with their judges that they're trying to get through that is all about just yardage. They're just trying to move the ball as far down the field as they can. And they're not worried about the meta, like as far as, the symbolism and the cultural war stuff. They're just trying to rack up points. That's all they care about. You've got these other guys who are just and to hold on to power, but that's part of it.
Okay.
Then you've got people like Trump or Green or whoever, who Trump, for instance, passed up some really easy opportunities to and I'm just argument's sake, legalize marijuana. Things that are fantastically popular within the US that could have moved the needle for him. He only needed a couple of percentage points. Or even the deal that Nancy Pelosi gave for the stimulus back in fall. There's certain things he could have done that he just didn't want to do because fuck you. That's why he's just not going to do it, because he didn't want to be pushed around. Or Marjorie Taylor Greene, she has her ideological worldview that the worldview is the point. Like that is their yardage. That's them putting points on the board. Is this expression of power, and they'd rather lose than have to dial it in. And the problem is that these two things are divergent. People who are very serious, like Mitch McConnell, and people who are, let's say, expressions of cultural frustration, like Taylor Greene. These are incompatible. Like they cannot work together unless they are not pressured in any way. And right now they're under a huge amount of pressure. If Mitch can't get rid of these people, they're eventually going to overtake and replace the people who are, the more serious parts of the GOP. And it's just going to become this weird rump party that can't win elections, but it's also foaming at the mouth crazy. For the Democrats, this is perfect. because they want someone like Greene that they can paint as a lunatic.
The problem
because she
is
helps.
they've spent like so much time creating this part of their base. Like, she didn't just spring out of nowhere. She's a reflection of everything the media says is a lie. It's all this left-wing conspiracy. Global warming is a scientific conspiracy. Blah 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 blah. The right has just spent all of this time growing this culture that they could then manipulate into voters that on a certain point, the Republicans are in a tough spot where now if you start attacking these people, it's like, well, these people are a giant chunk of your base. If you hit them with the stick too hard, they're just going to vote you out and get another crazy to replace you.
I believe I said something to the effect of our last podcast, Nick, was that they need to figure out how to subtly manipulate these people back to some sense of something that that as a country we can actually deal with, because I agree that the GOP has been doing this for years and years. You go look at floor speeches when they're trying to pass legislation, and you've got Republican legislators on there twisting the information to fit the narrative so that they can pass a bill a certain way or not. All these small incremental sort of lies that they've been sharing with their base and getting them to go on and on and on have sort of culminated in Trump and in people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so now they've got gigantic frickin' conspiracies and lies going on, and it's out of control. They've lost fucking control of this little baby that they've been fucking feeding for years. And I think the only way they're really going to get that back is if they figure out how to subtly start feeding different information in there to sort of bring these people back into their fold, something that can be controlled, because right now I don't think that this Trump base can be controlled.
Well, and the beauty of having this separation where you have the Republicans made AOC the face of the party. I mean, Trump practically ran against AOC in the squad. And then, I mean, he didn't want to run against Biden. He was like, well, AOC is going to pull the strings. They're going to do the same thing to Greene. But the problem is Greene, if you make the choice between Greene and AOC, the moderates are going to go with AOC because Greene is a lunatic. Even if they don't love all of AOC's policies, she's at least a sane, intelligent person that you just disagree with. Whereas Greene is obviously just this, unhinged like wine mom that, just watched too many YouTubes and is now suddenly, thrust into office. And she's just not she's not even somebody you just disagree with policy wise. She's just a kook. So if that's the choice that you make, if that's how everything gets framed, ultimately this country, the elections are decided by moderates. And if you put the moderates in that position, you're going to get guys like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris that wind up winning, and people like Trump and Greene that don't. Or, I mean, people like Greene will survive in their little districts, but as far as like nationally, they can't survive this. I mean, Trump got them wiped out, White House, Senate, Congress, or the House, everything in 4 years. And if that's the route that the Republican Party goes down, the Democrats, all they have to do is just play the same game back that Republicans were playing at them with AOC, but they're going to win because at the margins, that tolerance for crazy is not there. And if the Republican Party goes crazier to try and chase them and not back towards like the Mitt Romney kind of a sphere, they're just going to get more insane, but smaller.
Well, I think the problem is that the Republican Party is losing control over the Republican Party.
Absolutely.
The Republican Party, traditionally, its base support was things like Fox News and National Review, which are not the most honest of sources, but they're miles apart from what you're seeing with OWN and Breitbart springing up to capture this audience that the Republican Party created. And as things get more difficult for the party to really commandeer together, you're just going to see this increasing split and divide.
So I think that you guys are right. Or I think you're right too. I think that the Republican Party over the next several years assuming that they stay on the same track, which they likely will, is just going to weaken, right, electorally. I think the danger in that is it increases the likelihood for violence and terrorism. I think as they lose power, you're going to see a lot more of these secession type stuff that you're seeing spring up in several different states, right? So I do think that that's problematic. I also think that you'll see more of this election fraud stuff come up in local and state elections. And I mean, that could lead to a really bad place, right? So in one sense, I'm glad, because, you know, I think the Republican Party needs to be completely demolished as it is right now, and rebuilt in some way. But on the other side of it, I'm a little bit concerned, because I do think that ultimately, when a huge portion of the country feels like it's underrepresented and they can't win elections, that eventually that's going to kind of turn into violence. And especially when you have, you know, when it's sort of infected by this conspiracy victimology type stuff like it is.
Well, yeah, and you're right.
It pushes violence, though. Like, if you ever turn on talk radio, it's just encourages this.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I mean. It's like the whole culture is driven to this, like, almost this revolutionary type mentality.
So the advantage, or I should say, maybe not, the silver lining to this is that the people who are pushing that are in no position to win such a thing. And you can look at this, you know, January 6th as an example. There isn't in any part of the culture that you'd need it to be the sense that this is necessary and this is the right way to go, and like serious people that could pull it off would be any part of it. Now, within the people who are feeling disenfranchised and frustrated and alienated, you can milk those people for views and YouTube hits, but you can't actually mobilize them to do anything serious. So unfortunately, the Republicans have this problem where a huge amount of their voting base is being manipulated into thinking that violence is the way. But this is only at the very lowest tiers. Like, the more higher up you raise, like the military alone had no interest whatsoever in any of the December 6th. I mean, any of the serious people did any part of the defense, architecture, which is what you need for a coup to actually be effective. There's no appetite at all. Now, you're right. There is going to be violence in the next several years as these people who are frustrated and angry and get fed all this crazy. There is going to be elements of violence. It's going to happen. But I guess the silver lining is that it will be such a catastrophic failure. Every time it happens, it's going to make it worse for them. And just like December 6th or January 6th, they're never going to recover from that. And the next time they try it at a state capital, it's going to get worse for them. You're going to get terrorism laws in place, mass surveillance. They're going to wind up turning themselves into some kind of low IQ Al-Qaeda that is just non-effective. They'll do bad things, and it'll just make them the bad guys more and more.
Okay, I disagree with this to some extent. I believe it was Sam Harris who made this point, that a lot of what held Trump back is that while he had the negative traits of some of the world's worst leaders, Hitler, Mussolini, etc., he had none of the virtues, none of the good qualities. Hitler, Mussolini, they were soldiers. They had an intuitive intelligence. They could network. They were able to build up coalitions within the government to ultimately usurp it. Donald Trump couldn't pull any of that off. If Trump was able to do that, we could be looking at a very different America today. But
so let me disagree with you slightly. I think you're sort of right. I think that Trump is incompetent in lots of ways, but I also think there's something to be said. I mean, the United States isn't the Weimar Republic in Germany, right? It's not as vulnerable. There are institutions, there are people in government who aren't going to bend to Trump, right? And we saw a lot of this during the election fraud. I mean, look, Mike Pence saved the union, right? Not really, but I mean, he stood his ground, and he didn't have to. He could have withered away. He could have not participated, or he could have tried to, in some way, participate in some sort of fiasco just to please Trump. But he was like, no, screw that. So like when it mattered, he he came through. But I don't know. I think that it's just not the same.
It's not the same, and it would
Right.
be difficult. But
Right.
I'm saying
But you're right. He's not
a more
Hitler.
resourceful, more intelligent person with a broader, coherent strategy as to how to achieve their goal stands just an
So
infinitely larger chance of pulling it off than Donald Trump.
well, Trump does have some instinctual genius to him, right? He's a genius when it comes to branding. We've had this conversation.
When it comes to understanding power dynamics and
Right.
when it comes to rallying like the dumbest people imaginable around him. He is like bar none. And like people will like downplay this and be like, anyone can do that, blah, blah, blah. It's like, not like Trump can.
Yeah.
My pillow guy. I mean, it's so professional.
Those pillows suck, by the way.
That
They
reminded
kind of do,
me,
isn't
right?
that funny?
There's this poor company called My Pillow, not My Pillow Guy, or something like that. It's super similar, and they're just getting bombed right now because people think it's the same company, and it's not. I feel really bad.
Is it the German Mind Pillow?
Yeah, something stupid like that. Mike Pence also had death threats made against him, right? They showed up with zip ties and had a noose, built outside on January 6th, and they were looking for Mike Pence. And I don't believe I read or saw anywhere any sort of victimization by him. I don't think he even acknowledged that these people were out for blood for him.
Well, it's a little awkward when you're trying to run a party that wants you dead.
Yeah, but like,
so you don't want to bring that one up.
Well, right, and yeah,
that's a Streisand effect, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like, and I don't think it's intentional, and I'm just not sure where I stand on it, but I feel like the presentation that AOC gives off to a huge portion of the population is sort of immature emotionally and a little bit weak. And I'm not saying that because she's a woman. There's lots of women who were involved in that. People wanted to kill Nancy Pelosi too, right? But she handled it in the way she handled it, and it is what it is. But being inspired by a leader, right? In order for that to happen, right, to be truly inspired, you have to believe that leader is strong and that they're going to, that they can endure as well, right? And if you're the guy in the battlefield holding his head screaming, it's really hard to follow that person. And I feel like to some extent that's what's happening.
Prior to Trump, we had a lot of I mean, just think about prior to Trump, like a lot of the things that you just couldn't get away with in politics, like for instance, being married 3 times, like there's all kinds of or just the way that he talks or curses on Twitter or any number of things where you had such illusions of decorum that this country expected, where you're just like, well, if you're going to be like a leader, like think about Hillary Clinton's entire persona, like from the 1990s till, basically when she lost, was this like artificial like reconstruction of her as basically like a man. She basically had to operate as though, while technically female, she was, tough, ties to the Pentagon. Say what?
She was going as a man without a penis.
Right. I mean, but that was the whole thing. And the reason for that was that, well, this is America and this is expected. And, our leaders have to be a certain way. And then Trump showed up. Yeah, well, you know what? A lot of that stuff, we kind of did it because everything used to have gatekeepers and everything used to kind of go through these certain funnels. And it just had to be a certain way because, you had people that were thinking about, this is just what's expected. This is what the other team's going to do. So we need to do it. And it was so tightly controlled that you just wound up with these very similar results. Now that we're in a different era where social media just lets you bypass stuff and you don't need Fox because you can just create OANN and just do that instead. People like AOC who are just going to get on social media and just kind of pour their heart out. It looks surreal to people from an older generation. That's not how things were done. And it wasn't done because people thought it would make you look weak and no one would support you.
Just to throw this out there and using the military analogy. I mean, Trump's the type of person who, if you're on the battlefield with him and he thinks the other side's going to win, he's going to turn around and shoot you, right, and then walk the other way and go to the other side, right? So it's not like I think that he has some leadership skills. I think his presentation of strength is not actually real. I think it's all bullshit. Just to put that.
No, you're right. You're 100% right.
Trump has a certain sort of strength, but it's not the kind you'd want running anything except a fascist party.
Right.
Art, I feel like I understand your position a little bit better now with the generational thing. It does seem to be a bit of a generational thing that, you know, you get on and you make TikTok videos, you go on Instagram Live or Facebook Live, and that's just sort of how you communicate with your base and with the people who follow you. It's just, we'll probably see more and more of that as time goes on.
Everybody has that capability, not just her. I mean, anybody can videotape themselves and put themselves.
Isn't she still the youngest member in Congress? I mean,
No, Cawthorn is.
The guy
weird in the wheelchair, the weird like fasci guy who said that Hitler was his hero or whatever.
He's so awful, isn't he?
The guy's just next level bad.
Yeah. The rising star. You know who I really like is Kinzinger. I really like him. Guy, right? Do you know how he, like, his claim to fame was wrestling a guy had stabbed this woman in the throat, and he like wrestled the knife out of the guy's hand and saved the woman's life. And then he's like also a military hero and all of this other stuff. So
it's a testament to how insane the past few years have been that this wasn't even a blip in my news radar.
Well, it didn't happen recently.
Right.
It happened a while ago, but I mean, he's standing up to his own party. He's like one of the only people, him and like Liz Cheney and Ben Sasse and Mitt Romney are like standing against their entire party and saying, screw this, we're not going to do this anymore. You guys are screwed up. Now, he'll probably destroy his entire political career, but there's something to be said for that, right? I mean, how many Democrats would actually do that if the tables were turned? I don't know. I don't think that many. And so
John Fetterman.
Who's that?
The lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, right? The guy's like, he looks like a giant like WWE wrestler. Like he talks trash on Twitter. The guy's fantastic. Like if you don't follow John Fetterman, you absolutely should.
Okay.
Do you know who he is?
I don't know who he is. Oh.
No.
Okay. You guys should totally be following John Fetterman. He's going to run for the Senate seat that, what's his name, is leaving vacant in Pennsylvania.
Oh, Portman.
Portman, yeah.
Oh, I hope he wins. That's really bad for Republicans.
Yeah. No, he definitely will. The guy's like a total rock star, like in the state. But he's funny because he will get onto social media. Like he got into it with the lieutenant governor of Texas because the guy offered some giant reward for voter fraud. It's like $2 million, for an instance of voter fraud. So he found 3 that were Republicans that committed voter fraud in Pennsylvania. So he's been trying to collect from John. Like he's been sending him memes like, "Where's my money, John?" Like meme after meme after meme. He's like, you owe Pennsylvania $6 million, John. It's been hilarious. So they got T-shirts for it and all that. But you wouldn't have seen that years past. Like somebody who behaved like Trump, even within the Republicans, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, he'd have been a 1% candidate. So just times change. Like with the electorate. Right. But that's what I'm saying is that like, even like AOC getting on like, or Instagram and talking and kind of opening up. That's just how the future is. Like that's, we're not going to go back to the weird kind of a formalized, where I say weird, but I mean, to us, it was just normal. The very formal, very slickly packaged way that we used to present leaders, which you've only rarely got in front of a television or any kind of camera. And most of the time it was just kind of a mythos.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Now people have access to you all the time. You can't really fake it the way you used to be able to.
Well, I
mean,
think that's one of the reasons why
Biden won
Trump
by
liked it.
sitting in his basement.
That's true.
With Biden.
But Biden may be that last kind of gasp where the country kind of wanted to reject the future a bit and reject, what Trump was, that kind of Trumpification of things.
Well, in an ideal society, you wouldn't be like fetishizing your leaders like we do, right? Our leaders are like celebrities now.
Yeah,
that's who
what
AOC
I was trying to say about
Trump
Trump. He liked it because he was celebrity, like the celebrity. I think that's what he thought.
Right.
There was some novelty to Trump. Yeah, but Biden is kind of a rejection of that. But that kind of rejection doesn't last. Like that's a temporary blip. Like once the society is turned in a certain direction, we're not going to go back to like having like Instagram for ourselves, but then expecting our leaders to be these weird polished things that don't speak to us. Like this is a weird just a rejection of Trump being so crazy we couldn't take it anymore. But the future is going to be for people like AOC or Green, who
The future might be for people like AOC, but I think in the near future, the Democrats being generally more tended towards trying to go for moderate might still have more Bidens coming up. I think the Republican Party is just generally getting more extreme, and a lot of the people like Trump going at it on social media will probably be more attractive to them. But I think at least during the next few presidential cycles, it will just be the Democrat.
The Democratic Party would be fucking stupid if we thought that we were going to get some sort of like huge swing towards progressivism right now. And I hate saying that. I hate seeing the direction we've gone because, Biden's a moderate. It's definitely not where I wanted to go. I would have chosen several other candidates before Biden. However, so fucking fed up with Trump's nonsense. And I know that we're hanging on by a string. We won by thin margins I know we had a huge win, right? But just as a lot of people showed up to vote for the Democratic candidate, a shitload of people showed up to vote for Trump. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And I think it would be very arrogant and ignorant of us to just say, oh, we're here now. It's okay. Everybody can breathe. I think we need to work really fucking hard to keep things blue and to get them bluer and bluer, longer and longer, or else we're just in a world of shit. It's just like the icing on the cake right now. That's all we've got. Like we've got to get to the other layers. And until we've got a really good stronghold, I don't think pushing for more and more progressive policies is necessarily
the right way to go right now. What a pragmatic analysis.
We have to have a foundation, and I just think it's very very sensitive right now. I think it's very fragile right now.
I agree 100%, but I do actually think that the Democrat Party in general, when it comes to politics, is stupider than the Republicans. The Republicans
Republicans knew how to play the long game. The Democrats can't ever seem to fucking do that, but the Republicans play the long game very well. That turtle has had fucking brainchilds for 30 years plus, however long his career has been.
He understands what his job is. He understands what his position is. He's one of the most intelligent political operatives in the country.
Who?
McConnell.
Oh yeah, for sure. The fact that he survived this whole situation with Trumpism and all of that is pretty remarkable. And he got a lot done for conservatism.
A lot of this, he's largely responsible for a lot of the destruction of unionization efforts, things like that. He helped consolidate big business into the Republican Party. He survived the Tea Party swings when he allied himself with Rand Paul. He's very fucking good at what he does.
Yeah, I think he's a shrewd politician, for sure.
I think the Democrats need more people like that. The Republicans in general sort of bend towards pragmatism. At the end of the day, like the worst thing that happens to a Republican is they get branded a rhino, and then the whole Republican Party still lines up to vote for that rhino. Democrats the whole left is just very idealistic when it comes to politics.
And that's what I mean. I don't want to in 4 years come to another issue in our primaries that forces a bunch of progressives to stay home or not vote for the president in the general election. Like I don't want to see us do that. I think we need to sort of stick together for quite a while, and we can work within the party to continue to push for progressive issues. I just think it would be stupid for us to go through another 2016 in 2024.
Push back on some stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Really, you've got Texas teetering. You have the American Southwest, which is turning blue. You already lost Arizona, and Arizona doesn't look like it's going to be heading back. You have a kind of progression where if you can wait out the GOP for another cycle or two, they're going to collapse. They basically, just demographically, and not only that, but the way that the people moving out of California and changing the politics of other states nearby, it's just rewriting the map. I mean, they've losing Georgia, all of these different effects that are taking place mean that while unfortunately nobody likes it, if Democrats can just not screw up and just be a kind of center left party for another cycle or two, the entire bottom is going to collapse under the Republican Party. Like they aren't going to be able to hold up enough states, and you'll have the kind of breathing room to really push the country to the left. At the moment, that's probably not the right play. You should probably just hold the center, because we can hold the center, and no matter how psychotic and angry the right gets, they can't win. Like what they're doing is ensuring that as long as you don't fuck it up, they can't get back into power. The idea should just be to hold them out of power until they shrink a little bit more, and then start moving the goal, towards them. You know what I'm saying? Like then you advance. Right now, you just have to hold the center. Yeah, I mean, when you got fascism trying to rear its head, you need to, swallow your pride and, make nice with the centrists, and don't give the centrists the reason to go to the other side.
High five.
Yeah, because I'm this close to being a MAGA right now.
I worried that Bernie people would do that, because there were people who left and were like, I'm going to go vote for Trump. Like
that's what happens.
The problem is centrism created Trump. Like the failures of neoliberalism is why you have somebody like Trump, or why you have a Republican Party that's seeing their economic futures dwindling. You're losing that kind of base that created the American middle class, and it's being cannibalized by right-wing policies. But right-wingers don't want to hear that. They want to blame pronouns and Antifa and things that don't really matter, because they're just distracted by shiny objects. They can't focus on the fact that they can't get a minimum wage hike, or their unions are being destroyed, or you can't get Medicare for all. Like there's a million things where economically they're being wiped out by these right-wing policies that they support, because these right-wingers also support guns. And they're like, well, I got to keep my guns, so we got to be pro-freedom.
Yeah, anti-abortion. I mean, that's another huge
so there's things where centrism can't possibly fix what America is facing, because centrism is what broke it. This kind of acceptance that, well, this is just how it is. This is just how things have to be. It's not, but we're just not in a position to push back on it yet. We kind of need to hold the line a little bit longer, and then, move forward again with solutions that will actually fix these underlying problems.
Yeah. I mean, you guys, I think it's great that you think that. I mean,
but don't forget
the origin.
the
origin of what the Republican Party has become, and even what the Democratic Party is not just based in neoliberalism, and neoliberalism isn't necessarily centrism. And I would argue that in many, many ways, the neoliberal global sort of coalition, right, has led to an amazing period of economic growth that we've never seen throughout the world, and a period of peace that we haven't seen in human history.
Well, foreign policy is not economic policy.
And that doesn't mean that it's perfect, and that doesn't mean that there's not flaws in the system. But I don't understand how you can sort of look at what's going on. I mean, from a macro global perspective in this world, and see that billions and billions of people, or well over a billion people, have now come out of extreme poverty, and that generally the world is a wealthier place as a result of globalization, which is essentially an extension of neoliberal policies. And then in addition to that, you have all of these coalitions and world alliances, stuff that you have never seen before, right? And
that argument gave us Trump.
This is really
but I don't understand how, I mean, with the exception of there being
this is really easy. First of all, people, A, do not understand that things are getting better across the world. B, people are generally more concerned with their country than they are the world, so that already. But the issues with globalization is that its benefits are very real, but they're not easy to visualize. People do not intrinsically grasp.
100% agree with that.
Their iPad costs 30% less, that their cars are getting safer, all of that. But it's very easy for them to see their factories closing down. That is something that springs to mind. They're able to see the losses. The gains are subtle.
But that's the worst part of it. Is the worst part of our system is you're not able to appreciate it because you don't see. It's not like 40 years ago when people still had an attached or still had a memory of the Great Depression. What?
It also doesn't help just how oversold this was. In the beginnings and throughout most of it, it was that all of these areas that were heavily hit were going to instantly recover. And then this was paired with the fact that we reaped these tremendous gains and then didn't do anything to help areas that were demolished by international trade.
No, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that. But just to get back to my point before, because we got a little off topic, I don't think that, what was the point that you made about the Republican Party? So when Republican politicians challenge the Trumpian bases right now, they don't survive in the vast majority of cases. And I think you were alluding to they did. But people like Justin Amash, people like Liz Cheney, people like that don't survive. People like Mitt Romney.
Who was alluding to that?
You.
No, I made the exact opposite point.
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood what you were saying. I can't remember now because we're so distant from there. In any event, I also think it's interesting that if you look at a lot of the election results, Trump did much worse than a lot of the representatives and senators in his own party in a lot of the states like Maine and stuff. So that's telling in and of itself, right? So just throw that out there. I feel like there's not a lot of context now because we're so separated from what we were talking about. So.
I blame Roxy.
Huh?
I blame Heather.
Yeah, I just held it in for so long and then I got sidetracked. So it's like I can't remember or go back to it. So in any event, I do think that just to kind of sort of get back to where we started, I do think there's no dancing on this podcast. Absolutely. I'm just kidding. I do think that all of this stems from two things in the United States. That this stems from ingratitude, and it stems from a feeling of victimization. And I think that's especially sort of self-evident on the right and less so on the left, but I can sort of say where it comes from. But all these conspiracy theories, and this is what I was trying to tell you before, comes from this idea that that somebody's being victimized. And whether it's more systemic or whether it's more individualized, like egocentric, it's all victimization. And so I think we need to get away from that. I think we need to get away from blaming these sort of huge entities like corporations and the wealthy and the Russians and the Chinese and the media and the deep state and everybody
we need
else.
to blame who's accountable. I mean, there's nothing wrong with holding people accountable.
No, there's not. But I guess my point is that what happens in these situations is people sort of react, right? And it becomes like a boogeyman of sorts, right? So it's like everything is kind of related to this one thing. That's what happens with the left, with the corporations and the wealthy, right? That's what happened with the right, with the deep state and the media and the Democrats and all of that. It was sort of like that reflexive, this is them hurting me. I'm a victim of this system. There's nothing I can do, you know, and that's when the conspiracy stuff comes in and it's sort of just all kind of meshed together.
So it's fair to say, though, that corporations and a certain segment of the wealthy have played a tremendous part in what they feel victimized by.
So there's some reality to it. I agree with that. Like there's some historical reality to it. But I also think that corporations have done a lot of good things too, right? Rich people do lots and lots of good things as well. It's not like they're just evil. And you can make the argument, right? And it's a fine argument that there's these trillionaires out there, right? And then there's people starving, right? And that's a fine argument. And just as a moral issue, it seems pretty reasonable to say that that doesn't make sense, right? I get that perspective, but that doesn't mean that all of the corporations are evil and all of that kind of stuff. And I just feel like that's where the narrative is at.
Let me just clarify really quick. Is it the issue isn't that like Elon Musk is evil? He has some great memes that he posts regularly. So like everyone brings something to the table. The issue is that when you have, let's say, Medicare for all, and you have a country where, despite the rest of the world, our peer nations having some kind of government provided healthcare, we've got this weird, unique system where, because of a lot of corporate interests and a lot of money behind it, we have a lot of people suffering based off of the kind of economic benefits it provides a certain minority. So with that, it would be great to say we shouldn't feel victimized, we shouldn't take this attitude or this or that, but we have a very tangible problem, which is people who are making a lot of money are paying elected officials to support policies that let them keep making money at the expense of the health of the nation. So there's not really unfortunately, that's kind of a binary problem. Like, you can't just stop complaining about that and the problem will get fixed. There's nothing to do about it but to keep complaining about it until we're able to overcome the resistance.
The problem I have with that, so I agree with you, but the problem I have with that position is it's taken and it's seen as this is what's driving politicians, as opposed to there's a multitude of things that drive what politicians do and the choices they make. And a great example of this is the MAGA movement, right? Which is, at its core, right, it's sort of an anti-wealth, anti-corporation movement to some extent, right? And well,
I'm not entirely sure about that one.
The point, my primary point is that corporations are turning away from MAGA, right? After the election fraud stuff, lots of them came out and said, we're not going to support this anymore. They're losing donors and they know it. That is not changing one iota of the trajectory of the Republican Party, because the Republican base isn't going anywhere. So nobody's being influenced by these donors, right? So to me, that's an entire American political party that is losing millions and millions of however much money, right? And it's solely based on this sort of loyalty to this one person or whatever it is, right? Cultural wars, right? That are overcoming this sort of, wealth incentive that people talk about. So I don't, and I see that.
These people
what
after an election, it's really easy for these companies to say they're cutting off the GOP or whatever after an election. I want to see what happens the next cycle.
But this has been happening over time. I mean, this isn't something that just happened. A lot of, you saw this on Fox News, where a lot of advertisers abandoned the different various shows. And you've just seen it for a while. They don't, this is all, this is easily accessible information. We can all look it up after we get off, and I will. And I can post something about it, but I've read numerous things about it. It's just not the same. They don't have the same donor base. They're losing money. People don't want to support them. People don't want to be affiliated with them. Period. And it's not what's driving the
Where does that money go?
Huh?
Where does that money go?
What do you mean? What money?
So if you're in the medical industry, the insurance, these behemoths within the donor class, if you don't need to buy off the Republicans anymore because due to their own ideology, they're going off the deep end anyway, then you can start buying off more Democrats. So this is, again, part of the problem, is that you have these massive interests that are looking to defend their position. And if they don't need to defend it because you're doing the job for free, that's fine. They'll just buy off Chuck Schumer instead of buying off Mitch McConnell.
But there's a huge portion of the Democratic Party that is like anti-corporation, and it's a meaningful portion, right?
Sure, but is it enough to pass legislation?
What's that?
Is it enough to pass legislation?
No,
What-
because
what
we
kind
don't
of-
No,
have
that's
that
no,
at all.
exactly. Like that's what I'm saying is that like we're talking about like why do we keep talking about why the corporations are bad and this victimization, this and that? The reason is math. The reason is that we can't get enough people to overcome these forces to pass legislation that would change the material conditions
Except
of the
we
people in this
have.
country.
Except we do have 30 more million people on healthcare than were on healthcare 10 years ago, right? It's a slow process. It's a democratic process. It's a
Okay, yeah,
compromising process.
you have people on health care, but you still have people who are getting wiped out by medical debt. We've got a system
I
that's
agree. I think the American healthcare system is a shit show, and I am totally for a more universally based functioning system, probably something along the lines of the same thing that you guys support. I think it's a problem, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't been adjusted or it isn't better, much better.
Okay, but that's completely irrelevant. Like the fact that it's getting slightly better over time is not the point.
Slightly better. 30 million more people having healthcare is not slightly better.
But however
It's
you want to
significantly
define
better.
that, if it was significant or slightly, the reason why it didn't get even better was because of those
But
corporations.
this is
No,
where signed off on. It could have been much better if those fuckers weren't invited, and they had to be invited.
This is where the argument falls off for me, because what happens is what you guys are talking about. If you want this, and this, and you want it right now, that's authoritarianism. We don't do that in America. Things are going to go slow. You want to change the entire healthcare system. You want to do all of that. That's going to take time. It just doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. And that's just
you're ignoring though that people who are making it go slower and the process go
exactly. The Europeans did this 100 years ago. Like you're acting like, oh, we just need a little bit more time. You need to admit that there are forces within our economic system that are preventing us from doing shit that the Europeans did 100 years. Then what's the problem?
We don't have a European system. We don't have a parliamentary system. We have a United States system.
That's the point. That's what we're saying, is that there are people in the way from us making progress. So that's why we're still feeling victimized.
Okay. But I'm not denying that corporations play some sort of role in preventing.
Then we agree.
We do agree on some level, but they're not the only thing. They're not the only boogeyman. They're not the only rationale that you're not getting policies passed that you want to get passed.
But they're the biggest.
There's a cultural part of America on the conservative side
by these guys
that do not believe that we should have health care for all. They believe in this. Hold on one second. I know I'm talking a lot, but just give me 1 second.
Corporations. It's called donors and lobbying. And where did they come from? The evil rich corporations.
Lobbying did not create a culture of individualism in the United States. That was there since the founding, and that's what.
But right-wing propaganda.
You guys are calling it right-wing propaganda, but it's a part of the culture. It's a part of if you read what the founders wrote, people like Ben Franklin, who was anti-welfare. Right? People like that. This is a part of who we are as a nation. It's not just because corporations are selling it. It's because people have it inherently in their culture that we shouldn't have a more socialized system because people should be able to, right or wrong, and I don't agree with it in a lot of circumstances, pick themselves up and move forward on their own through working hard. And they should get it for themselves. I understand.
Yeah, there is a whole network of basically right-wing propaganda that enforces these cultural elements, that spends a lot of money figuring out the perfect way to sell your message to these people. Yes. It is not just culture. It is the existing culture getting hooked into by some of the wealthiest.
So if all that is true, right? What is this right-wing movement towards populism? What is this support that remember when Trump ran in 2016 and he talked about Medicare for all and all of that kind of stuff? He was extremely sort of like one of the most liberal positions I remember, right? Because he was playing to his base, right? There is a huge portion of people and on the right side of the aisle that support some of this stuff. So it's not true that propaganda works in all scenarios. I'm just saying that there are people.
Wait. The same forces that spent time on the getting people to be more libertarian, also spent time building up people who would eventually vote for Trump because, again, I think this goes back to someone here could correct me. Murray Rothbard was the one who initially, the libertarian who initially pointed out that the key to getting libertarian policies passed was to use the existing racist white people and to sort of hook them into the same party. And from then on, it was just rallying up these people's inner emotions and then never delivering anything they wanted. Eventually,
blaming the other side for that.
Predicted, well, the rubes that you spent this whole time herding together usurped the party from you.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier. Trump and Green and that brand is the culmination of all of those incremental little lies and manipulations to get them to believe it. I mean,
but look,
socialism is evil.
Okay, no, let me. I can. No, I can.
That's what Hitler did. So.
All right, but here's your disconnect. I can just make it real simple for you. The reason that populism is okay at the base of the party, but it's not okay at the functional management layer where like legislation gets passed, is that corporations can buy off those people at that management layer. You can't buy off the base. You can do a lot of propaganda that influences them, but if they can rest free of that, like the reason Trump said, hey, let's do Medicare for all or something similar, or the reason that you have these populists who are okay with populist policies is that this idea that since the founding, we've been for independence, we don't want this stuff, is not true. If you can get past that management layer and actually get to the people down there, they would love them some populism. They would love free this and free that. They would take it. But the problem is where votes actually get made at that management layer, the Mitch McConnells, all that, those people are bought the fuck off. And that's it.
So I think probably this is what I sort of want to have you guys take away from this conversation. I agree that corporations influence political parties. I agree that corporations and lobbyists and various other interests influence politicians. That's obviously true. I do not believe that it is the primary driver. I do not believe that it is as influential as you make it. And I think what it's being used as now is irrationally applying it to all things and populists sort of exploiting the fringe bases of the party in sort of manipulating them by utilizing this sort of, boogeyman to sort of
go there with you.
gather support.
Because there are people that I know that are much further left to me, and anybody who's rich, anybody who has a corporation, any of it, it's all freaking evil, right? The whole system is evil. I get what you're saying. I don't think that we're able to pick out the nuances of that smaller, weirder faction over here that blames them for everything and they're just pure evil. And they can't see like the good that like the Gates Foundation has done, for instance. Right, because that has done a lot of good. There's a lot of rich philanthropists and other people who have done a lot of really great things. Like you can't
like microchipping rednecks.
Yes. Well, I mean, that was hilarious. I mean, Elon Musk is actually the one who wants to chip your fucking brain. Thank you very much. And they love this guy. So for me, it's just the conspiracies. It's just the nonsense lies, and the base gets all riled up by it. And you made a very good point that Trump did say something about some kind of medical and health insurance for all, and it's going to be great. It's going to be tremendous. And he's like, in 2 more weeks, and 2 more weeks, and 2 more weeks, and 4 years later, nothing ever fucking happened. But he was able to manipulate and wield stories from point A to point B. And he would say one thing one day and another thing another day. And as long as he said it this time, his base is going to continue to point to this time and not even acknowledge that he said this. So I don't think they even fucking cared. I think it was during a time when the Sanders movement was kind of crumbling, and he was like, I'm going to get some of these people over here. And I think that's when he was talking about that, and he reeled in about 15% of us, and that was it. I think that was about the extent of what he said on giving.
I think that part of this is that Nick seems to think that the people who voted for Trump completely bought into everything Trump said, when if you talk to a lot of these people, they understood that part of Trump was a con man. Like when you look at his evangelical support, and that might seem very, very strange to a lot of people, how guy who's fucking porn stars while his wife is giving birth to their kid is going to be the face of evangelicalism. Can't even name a fucking Bible verse, holds the Bible upside down, you know, all of this stuff. But whenever I talk to evangelicals, they actually didn't consider Trump to be a very religious person. They they might be stupid, but they're not that stupid. What they saw in Trump was someone who didn't care to the point where he would give them whatever they wanted. Like when you saw the kerfluffle over abortion, Trump said, "Yeah, let's throw them in jail," and then the anti-abortion activists were like, "No, no, 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 no. This is not what we want to do to women. The women are the victims." And the very next day, Trump's like, no, 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 you don't throw them in jail." People were like, "Oh, look, he's flip-flopping. Oh, blah, blah, blah." The evangelicals who saw that were like, "Oh, Trump doesn't care either way, but he is willing to completely 180 and pander to what we want."
But I don't actually think that people who vote for him believe everything he says. I think that
No,
they
no, no,
like.
but when you say that he was like offering Medicare for all, I don't
I'm
know.
saying that appealed to some
I
people.
don't think any of his base took that seriously. They like kind of looked at it and were like, "Oh, he's just trying to get."
I think there were lots of people that I interacted with that saw Trump as a alternative to Hillary Clinton, as the alternative to Hillary Clinton, and that his populism, even though it was imperfect and it wasn't Sanders, that it still, you know, he still wanted to get rid of TPP, right? And he still didn't want to be involved in foreign wars, and he didn't, you know, so that stuff appealed to some people to the point where he got them to vote. And just saying things, whatever he said on any given day, that the Medicare thing was replayed a lot, and they saw that too. So it was just a way of kind of hooking people in and not following through with it. But I think that the reason a lot of people like Trump isn't because of anything, one thing specifically. I think it's because of who he is. I think it's because he hates, you know, he is just ruthless, right? And the right wing of the Republican Party wanted somebody to come in and smash shit. And that's what he was willing to do. And they still love him to this day.
Oh, I mean, there were parts of Donald Trump that I found refreshing. Like, I hate Donald Trump, but I also hate these sort of clone copy politicians who just get up there, try to, you know, play themselves off as these sterile blah, blah, blah. It was legitimately entertaining to watch Trump just.
And I think that a lot of people felt like that. And a lot of people felt like that to such an extent that they were willing to vote for him. People loved that about him, that he wasn't traditional, right? But he was something much, much worse. And and now the first populist candidate that we have in a really long time, real sort of populist, is defined by Trump. And that's how the country's seeing populism right now, a lot of the country. So
which is funny because he governed like Mitt Romney. Like if you just
absolutely did.
Takes that as populism in general or just extreme right-wing populism. Like, I don't think the average person believes a Bernie Sanders presidency would have been anything like that.
No, but I think that they might feel like a that populism in the United States doesn't work, and that it ultimately might lead to extremism on either side. And they've seen sort of extremism throughout the United States over the past 4 years happen on both sides of the aisle, not just one, and it scares the shit out of people. And I think that in places like Florida, especially where you have like lots of Cubans, right, who used to live in a socialist country, that, you know, we've lost that state because of the sort of the left leftward shift that we've had. So I do think
but
that it
that's where
hasn't.
I disagree. I don't think it's the leftward shift that did that. I think it's the right-wing lies and conspiracies that did that, because it's absolutely
But
not
they
true
wouldn't
what they
be able
think
to
would
attach
happen.
it.
No.
They've been saying this for
No,
20
you've got
years.
it's just got you have
But
old people in Florida. I mean, the people retired there.
You
They're
know,
old. They're
it's,
just
So there was a huge percentage of Cubans that never voted that voted this election for Trump.
in Miami.
Yes.
The basic Cubans in general are kind of like, culturally, they're very right wing. They're not like an evangelical right wing culture, but they have this kind of that manliness, macho, blah 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 to them. They generally like a lot of Democrat policies. I mean, for fuck's sake, they voted for the minimum wage hike. They hate anything they can associate with communism.
Yeah.
But
if the
here's my
Republican Party
point.
wasn't over the top racist, they would never lose an election. If you look at like Hispanic voters, voters from Mexico, voters from Latin America, the actual cultural values they hold, super compatible. You have a very Catholic culture, very work culture, things that resonate with Republican messaging. The problem is Republicans fucking hate them. So, or the base does. The party would love to kind of entice them over. And to a certain extent, people like Trump can, because, you know,
Don't
Trump
give him any
can
pointers, Art. Stop this right now.
All right. Well, you know where I'm going with this. I'll just leave it at that.
But
Because that's going to be the smart populist candidate that you were talking about,
But-
Matt.
but here's the thing.
And then boom.
The Republicans have been yelling communism, communism, communism for decades.
Yeah. The
They
Red
weren't
Scare-
ever able to associate it with somebody. AOC and Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar and all of these other people have enabled them to do it, because
well, here's the
although
thing.
they're not
They were
communists,
always able
they're
to
offering socialistic policies.
Obama was a communist.
It's
How
just
about
an
Joe
easier
Biden?
marketing
What about
scheme.
Joe Biden?
Here's the thing.
Joe
they've
Biden didn't go
always
as
been
far
able
as
to paint
Bernie Sanders did
Democrats
at all.
being
He's
communist.
the most progressive president we've ever fucking had.
Sadly, yes.
That's probably true.
Okay, but he did. But in the
No, I
in his
know. I'm
policy
taking a
proposals, he
preemptive.
didn't go that far. I mean, he did not go to the extent
Look,
that
I'm
Bernie
not
Sanders went. He
lying.
didn't say he was going to provide health care for all illegal immigrants, right? He didn't do
I'm not gonna
stuff.
mind my P's and Q's because the fucking GOP's making threats. Like, that's not how this works. I'm gonna
The thing
continue and
is,
move the fuck
I'm
on.
just all I'm saying
And
is
I'm like,
I'm not
there
telling
and
you to do
bullshit.
anything.
this doesn't matter as much anymore.
I'm telling you that there's a certain segment of the population who are really turned off by certain policy initiatives and certain politicians. Whether or not that is motivating for you in any way or changes your strategy is a totally different question.
Well, we probably shouldn't get policies that are good because it makes some people feel weird.
But not everybody agrees with you that they're good.
Okay.
No, I realize that, but I'm not. I'm just saying we should
I mean-
advocate for them. Like, we shouldn't even advocate for what's right if some people like don't like words.
I'm just telling you, from a pragmatic, a completely pragmatic, shrewd political position, forget about whether it's right or wrong.
Nick,
I agree. I just think we need to stop branding it that way and stop giving them fuel for their fucking fire. Do a better
Exactly.
job at
Yeah.
telling them
No,
right.
it's
Then maybe that's the problem. Don't say things like defund the police. There you go.
Yes,
we should
so
defund
I
the police.
Wait. This goes into something we said earlier that we never got to address. I agree. We should be very pragmatic here. So on a nuanced technical level, the rich and the corporations aren't evil, but I think it sure as fuck plays into the Democratic strengths to paint them as evil. Just on a very crude, pragmatic sense, I think that should be our messaging. And all of us
Except what I would say is that when you do things and when you're disingenuous and you create boogeymen that are sort of there but not the every problem, and you sort
Like
of
socialism?
and you do that kind of stuff, what you do is create extremes, or you expand the extremes within your party. That's what happened in 2016.
And we're not
On
going
both
to get
sides.
anywhere if we don't expand the extremes. Like the extremes are what push legislation towards a certain direction.
No, they don't. No, they don't. I don't even understand why you would think that. When the political parties are pushed towards their extremes, it slows everything down because politicians can't have no room to maneuver. They can't compromise.
Yeah,
and
it
that's what's
slows
happened.
things
That's
down
why you see a
because
stagnant
they have to
Congress.
figure
And then
out-
who?
Doesn't matter. None of that matters.
Yeah, it slows things down because they have to figure out how to get around you. And part of that, a lot of times, is they have to compromise with you.
Yeah, that's called democracy, guys. Hi.
Yeah.
You guys want to live in North Korea, by all means, you can get all you want because you can push through things like that all the time.
Everything you want,
but we live in a democracy, so we have to. We are required to.
Everything you want, you're going to get a lot more than if you come to the table just wanting to give in.
Why are you talking like we don't want to negotiate? That's the funniest thing.
Because that's what you're telling me.
Nobody said that. You're just making that up. Nobody said that. We're just talking about advocating for positions that are good. Nobody's saying that like we can't negotiate.
So this is why I'm saying it, because if you have an extreme position on the left and somebody has an extreme position on the right, and both sides are saying, and the left is expecting and the left is expecting their politicians to do one thing specifically, and if they move anywhere out of that position, they're going to lose support, and that's how the right feels, and that's how the left feels. Then you're not going to negotiate. Fringe movements prevent negotiation and compromise. When you move towards the center,
you told me earlier. Let me just explain why you were right earlier, but you're wrong now. So you're talking about our medical situation in the United States. So we have 30 million people more that are covered now than in the past. That's wonderful. That's not awesome, but we're not going to give up on our position just because somebody else has a position that no one should have healthcare and people should die in the streets so they can't afford healthcare. If what we have to do is hold our line and move it slowly, we'll do that. It's not awesome, but we're not going to give in just because what they want for a compromise is everyone dies in the streets.
But that's that's not moving towards your fringes. That's called compromise. There was still a very much,
and that's what we're doing.
Okay, but I'm not talking about that. He's making a point about how moving to the fringes is a good idea, and I'm telling you why.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
No, it absolutely is.
But you're not. But you can say that, but you have to explain why.
People to move their policies towards that fringe. That's literally what the Tea Party did with the Republican Party. That's why it's so fucking effective.
They actually.
A lot of the GOP is not a part of the Tea Party, but the Tea Party is so extremely powerful in the Republican.
Guys, I don't know. Listen, I don't know what government or Congress that you guys have been watching for the last 10 years, but ours can't get anything done. And the reason it can't get anything done is for the exact reasons, the exact things that you're advocating for. It's because the right wing of the Republican Party will not allow their politicians to do anything outside of these parameters that they've set. And also has this pretty powerful hold, right? And so when they try to come together and they start negotiating and they say things like, well, we're going to get rid of the minimum wage so we can pass the stimulus. And Art says, nah, fuck them now because I wanted that, right? That's what I'm talking about. And it constrains politicians. So the further off you go, the less compromising you become, the less you get done. And when you try to push stuff.
Imaginable. Like seriously, you sound like the worst negotiator imaginable. Like you just come to the table like, okay, everything I want, I'm gonna lose on, so I better just go straight for the center. That is.
I don't understand what you're saying. I'm not saying anything like what I'm not advocating for a certain proposal. What I'm saying is that they have no room to maneuver within a negotiating table, right? So they're not able to say, okay, we'll give up this and we can do that. That's how you compromise, right? Because this side of their this particular portion of their base won't allow them to do that. And when that happens, that's when you fail. That's when bills go out the window. And that's what happens. That's what happens with immigration. That's what happens with healthcare. So anytime you have a power share in Congress, you're fucked because nobody can compromise on anything because the fringe bases of each party are holding politicians down.
It doesn't look like Republicans struggle to pass much except a wall.
I don't know what you're talking about. When they were in power, I mean, they had all three they had the entire legislative branch and the executive branch. So yeah, they passed stuff when they had all the power.
Yes. So you accumulate power, and then within your base, you negotiate for where it's going to go.
Within the base. So I think there's two different negotiations going on. There's the negotiation within the left and compromise, and then there's the compromise between the left and the right. I feel like we're kind of talking about two different things here.
Yeah, well, it's fun to think that you're going to hold two houses of Congress in the presidency in every election in some weird fantastical world, right? Or that somehow you're going to persuade somebody like Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema to do what you want to do. But that's never going to happen. All you're doing with these fringe movements is empowering like 5 senators to be able to sort of make these determinations about everything that happens. You're not empowering yourself. Like this isn't
worked. There's a term for this. It's called when the tail's wagging the dog. And it's how coalition democracies.
But it's not working. So what you're saying is failing. So what do you mean? You keep talking about this negotiation tactic, but you're not explaining to me what that means.
Extreme.
You can do whatever you want. You can have whatever tactic you want. If somebody's not willing to give something up, then you're not going to win.
Fringes hold a lot more power representatively than they should, because you need their vote to get your shit passed. As such, and this happens in every democracy, every real democracy.
The fringes of each party have gotten much more left and right wing in the past 10 years. And in the past 10 years, we've gotten a lot less legislation passed.
There's 2 parties, but...
So there's empirical evidence that says what you're saying is not true.
You both have to appeal to the extreme moderates to some degree, but you also have to get the extreme, if you're on the left, the extreme leftists on board. And a lot of that is difficult. It's not pretty. It's messy as fuck, but that is how politics works.
Okay. All right. I gotta get going. Hang on one sec. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it. This was a lively conversation, as always. Any last words?
Where's the music?
Do you want the music?
I didn't play the music. You don't have to play the music. I was just wondering where the fuck.
I tried to last time and I fucked it up.
I think that the fringe on the left is inherently far more good than the
well,
fringe.
that's
on
because
the right.
you support it.
No,
I mean, I agree with you.
Thing. I think that's just a moral. It's just a moral thing, because the fringe on the right, you know, harbors racists and bigots and shit like that. So, and maybe that sounds hypocritical, but they need to get those fuckers out.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
There are other evils in the world besides white supremacy. All right.
Are you going to turn the fucking music off?
No, we're ending the podcast.
You said last word.